Ladies and gentlemen, the art of the playoffs are such a complicated time for so many different franchises. You know, me personally, as a diehard Redskins slash Commanders fan, the playoffs were such a treacherous time for me because if we even made the playoffs, the chances of us winning and just like not getting embarrassed were usually not in our favor. But the playoffs in the NFL are the pinnacle of what great football is all about. The best clashing with the best to create a product and create an entertainment that is beautiful for a wide variety of audiences. But ladies and gentlemen, there are always stinkers that just find their way to slide into the playoffs. Teams that are just not very good sneaking their way into the playoffs. So that is the concept of today's video. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the four worst playoff teams in NFL history. In my opinion, it's not super direct, but it's just my opinion. I appreciate everyone's patience again. I do still have COVID. I do still have the sniffles. I feel like shit. But we're still out here. We're still grinding content. If you want to support me, check out my Instagram in the bio below. Or check out my wrestling company, TF Crew, also linked below. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into the worst playoff teams ever. First on my list, and keep in mind this is not in order, is the 1999 Detroit Lions. Now, the 99 Lions, they certainly had a roller coaster of a season. They finished with an 8-8 record, got themselves a little wild card spot, and this is actually their first playoff appearance in 2 years. But the main reason that I'm calling them one of the worst teams is, the abrupt retirement of Barry Sanders right before the season began. So their head coach was Bobby Ross, and like I said, they went 8-8, and they lost in the wild card to the Washington Redskins, 27-13. And like I said, Barry Sanders retired on them. They started the season strong, winning 6 of their first 8, which was great, but they really just kind of fell apart as the season went on, and they lost their final 4 regular season games. I mean, barely clinging onto that wild card spot. And they had some notable games. In Week 1, they beat the Seahawks 28-20. Having some strong play from their backup running backs. Week 8, they were actually able to beat the Packers in overtime. And then, of course, that wild card loss to the Redskins, 27-13. Some key players on this roster was Charlie Batch in his second season. He had a terrible season. For, I guess, older times, this wasn't horrible, but 2,600 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, and 15 interceptions is abysmal to me. Gus Frerotte was the backup quarterback, which is cool. The guy having to step in for Barry Sanders was Greg Hill, who was able to rush for a little over 500 yards and 4 touchdowns, which is, nothing like Barry Sanders. Johnny Morton, Jermaine Krall, and David Sloan were some of the pass catchers. On defense, they had like Robert Porcher, Stephen Boyd, Brian Westbrook, Luther Ellis, just some, pieces around this defense. Jason Hanson, it's a great kicker at least, and Desmond Howard was their return specialist. This team is, they overachieved early and then just completely faltered late and then got Mickey Mouse to the playoffs. There was certainly a void left by Barry Sanders' retirement, and it was just never ever filled. Playmakers and athletes tried to kind of sub in for it, but it just did not happen. They were certainly lackluster. And the Lions would not actually make the postseason all the way until 2011. And, this season really represents the beginning of the Lions' true struggle in the NFL. Next on our list, ladies and gentlemen, is the 2014 Carolina Panthers. Now, these Panthers had one strange season with a 7-8-1 record under head coach Ron Rivera, where they were actually able to beat the Cardinals in the wild card before getting absolutely smacked by the Seahawks in the divisional. The Panthers overcame a midseason slump, and I'm talking a 7-game winless streak, and they were able to do this in a historically weak NFC South to actually still clinch a playoff spot despite having a losing record. I mean, I get it. They showed some resilience towards the end of the season with a little bit of a 4-game winning streak to sneak their way into the playoffs, but still, that is not a quality football team. Some key games for them. Week 1, they were able to beat the Bucs 20-14. Starting the season strong with backup quarterback Derek Anderson filling in for the injured Cam Newton. By week 6, they tied the Bengals 37-37 in one of the rare NFL ties. Week 15, they were able to get a dominant win in New Orleans in like a must-win game. And then the wild card round, they were able to take advantage of a Cardinals team decimated by injuries. And they held the Arizona Cardinals to an NFL playoff record low, 78 total yards. In the divisional round, that's when the Seahawks ended Carolina's little magical run with a crazy second half performance. But, the Panthers still showed some fight. Key players on this offense was like Cam Newton, who, had an up and down season due to the injuries with 18 touchdowns and 12 picks. Had about 3,700 total yards combined and 5 rushing touchdowns. He suffered a car accident late in the season, which did not really derail his ability a little bit, but definitely was just more outside distraction. Jonathan Stewart was the lead back, who is a great name. He had 800 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is a spark. But not exactly what you want out of your number one running back. And this was after D'Angelo Williams was starting to deal with some injuries. Kelvin Benjamin, the rookie wide receiver, had a really strong debut season, though, of 73 catches and 1,000 yards with 9 touchdowns. His big size certainly helped. And then, of course, the ultra-reliable Greg Olsen, 84 catches, 1,000 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And a, subpar offensive line allowed Newton to get sacked 38 times. On defense, though, they did have some cool names like Luke Kuechly, Thomas Davis, Josh Norman, Charles Johnson, and Star Latui and Kawan Short. Some actually decent names on this defense that actually would start developing into some star players in the next few years. Still not enough to make them like a great team. Graham Gano and Brad Nortman were the special teams guys, kicker and punter respectively. And like I said, they had a 7-game winless streak going 0-6-1 from weeks 3 to 10, but still were able to rally to make the playoffs. They were the division champs by default because the NFC South was horrendous. And they were able to clinch the division week 17 with a blowout win over Atlanta. Their wild card win over the Cardinals was their first playoff win for the franchise since 2005, even though they were playing with a third-string quarterback, Ryan Lindley. I'm talking about the Cardinals. But like I said, they had defensive development towards the end of the season because they had some serious stars on that defensive style that was just developing and coming into their own. In the end, the 2014 Panthers are remembered as a team who were kind of just able to sneak into the playoffs because of a horribly weak division, and they just made the most of a second chance after curb stomping the injury-filled Cardinals. The 2010 Seattle Seahawks, who had one of the worst records of all time heading into the playoffs with a 7-9 record, and they actually became the first team to ever win the division and make the playoffs with a losing record. And despite this quite dubious distinction, they pulled off a shocking upset in the playoffs in the wild card against the Saints when they had Marshawn Lynch's beast-quake run. Their head coach was Pete Carroll in his first year with Seattle, who was obviously a legendary coach, and they were able to beat the Saints in the wild card 41-36. Again, highlighted by the Beastquake run, but then lost in the divisional to the Chicago Bears 35-24. In week 1, some of the key games, like I said, week 1, they were able to beat the 49ers 31-6 with a surprising blowout win. Week 14, they were able to beat the Rams 16-6. And then in week 17, in a winner-takes-all game for the NFC West title. Like I already said, I already mentioned the Beastquake a couple times. In the divisional round, like I said, they did lose to the Bears, but, the Seahawks fell behind early and, did actually show some good fight and really made a run at almost winning that game. Let's talk about some of the key players on this roster. We have Matt Hasselbeck, the veteran quarterback with a certainly up and down season. A touch over 3,000 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 17 interceptions. He did do pretty good in the playoffs, but again, that's just not starting quarterback level play. Marshawn Lynch, who got acquired midseason in a trade with Buffalo, his impact was, modest in the regular season with a little over 500 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, but, that historic playoff run right there. Mike Williams, John Carlson are some of the highlights of pass catchers over here. Mike Williams being the former first-round pick, trying to revive his bust of a career. The offensive line struggled with injuries and inconsistency, but rookie left tackle, I should say, Russell Kuhn was really looking like a star. But here comes the fun part. Let's talk about the defense. This Seahawk defense, again, has some really great young names that really are going to end up becoming stars. And I'm looking at Earl Thomas, the rookie first-round pick safety, who had a huge impact with 5 interceptions. Chris Clemens was a great defensive end for them. Lofa Tapatu was also a great player on the defense with 88 tackles, a sack, and a pick. Red Bryant was a solid defensive end run stopper, and Marcus Trufant was a solid cornerback and a nice veteran for that secondary. Leon Washington did the kick returning, while Olindo Mayer was the kicker, and John Ryan was the punter. Like I said, they were the first team to make the playoffs with a losing record, which is already crazy enough. This was Pete Carroll's arrival season, and this just made such a fun Cinderella story for them to actually win their wild card game too over the heavily favored Saints, and it really cemented their place in the NFL as one of the biggest playoff underdogs, but also on this list as one of the worst team teams to ever make the playoffs. And, they're not remembered for that losing record. They're remembered for the start of something great. Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse my stuttering. This COVID is literally fucking kicking my ass right now. But last and certainly not least on this list is my favorite team of all time. One of the greatest underdog playoff teams ever, but also one of the worst teams to sneak their ass into the playoffs. I'm talking about none other than the 2020 Washington football team, baby. The 2020 Washington football team, now known as the Commanders, formerly known as the Redskins, had a improbable playoff berth under first-year head coach Ron Rivera. The team was able to finish with a 7-9 record, winning the NFC East in one of the weakest divisions in NFL history once again. And we were able to actually put up a really strong fight in the wild card against Tom Brady's Bucs, who would end up winning the Super Bowl. All right, this wildcard game makes me so mad. If you guys remember watching that, 'cause of course I remember watching it as a kid, dude, that was so rigged. The amount of penalties being called in favor of the Bucs was actually insane. I think if the refs don't rig that, we actually win that playoff card game, but that doesn't make the NFL as much money because, Tom Brady in the playoffs or Taylor Heineke in the playoffs. Starting week 1, we have a 27-17 comeback over the Eagles, which was fueled by a dominant defensive performance with 8 sacks. In week 10, we beat the Bengals 20-9, marking a turning point in the season and moving closer to us eventually winning that title. We had an upset to the previously undefeated Steelers, beating them 23-17, really showcasing this defense's strength and resilience. And then in Week 17, we were able to clinch the NFC East with a 20-14 win over the Eagles, securing that playoff berth. I already mentioned what happened in the wild card round. That was rigged. But backup quarterback Taylor Heineke put the team on his back, put the city on his back, and went out there and balled. And he immediately became one of my favorite players in Commanders history right there. But let's talk about some key players on the roster. Alex Smith, that crazy comeback from a life-threatening leg injury was the story of the season, man. He started 6 games and finished with 1,500 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, and 8 picks, and won the 2020 NFL Comeback Player of the Year. I mean, fantastic stats to come back from, a life-threatening leg injury. Taylor Heineke also became a GOAT for that crazy wildcard performance. He threw for 300 yards on a touchdown and rushed for 46 yards and another touchdown. I'm a huge Taylor Heineke fan. I have his jersey. I will forever worship the Heineke. Well, let's talk about running backs. Antonio Gibson was our rookie running back who had nearly 800 yards and 11 touchdowns despite missing 2 games. Scary Terry also established himself as one of the best young pass catchers, finishing with 87 catches, 1,100 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And that's, again, despite the inconsistent quarterback play. Logan Thomas was our tight end that season, the former quarterback. And our offensive line, which was anchored by Brandon Sheriff, who were in the actual first-team All-Pro that year, was, solid despite some injuries in and out. Defense is, again, where we have some fun. Chase Young, Montez Sweat, John Allen, and Daron Payne were the 4 up front. That is an elite 4 that just never really panned out or achieved their full potential, in my opinion. Obviously, Chase Young, he never got his full potential. Montez Sweat is starting to get it with some double-digit sack seasons. And John Allen and Daron Payne have always been, really good to great defensive tackles. But, again, I don't think they ever truly achieved what their potential was, especially as a unit together. Kendall Fuller led the team with 4 picks as a great cornerback, and the defensive as a unit finished 4th in total yards allowed and 2nd in passing yards allowed, kind of emerging like one of the league's best young units. Dustin Hopkins was the kicker, and the GOAT Tressway was our punter. And this really kind of showed Ron Rivera's leadership to coach the entire season while undergoing treatment for cancer. It truly inspired the team, the fans, with just resilience and determination. Alex Smith's comeback was crazy. Our defensive dominance really made me think that we were going to be a defensive stronghold for a long time, but that really just did not happen. And then, of course, making the playoffs with a 7-9 record. We were the ultimate perseverance, the ultimate underdog. But unfortunately, all that good stuff, we still could not beat the Bucs, even though we should have. Refs rigged that. But to me, as a young Washington fan, I truly thought this was the start of something great for the Washington football team / Washington Commanders / Redskins franchise. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to wrap up our videos of the worst playoff teams of all time. No, this list is not in order. These are just 4 of the teams that I think are some of the worst of all time. If you guys want to see more of this type of content, please make sure to subscribe. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers already. We smashed 500 subscribers so quickly. So let's continue on the road to 1,000. I'm so thankful for you guys. You guys make this so fun, and I will continue to produce if you guys continue to enjoy. Like I said, check out my wrestling company, TF Crew. Check out my Instagram also in the bio. And ladies and gentlemen, please comment any video ideas you have. And most importantly, guys, make sure you smoke crack and eat drywall. I will see you guys again very, very soon for another Gabe Sayers Believer video.